Well, good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with all of you today. So before we get started, we'd like to acknowledge the land that we are coming to you from, which is Toronto, which is known as the Dish with One Spoon territory. We respectfully acknowledge the past and present traditional owners of this territory and their unique role in the life of the region. Toronto is on the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe and the Haudenosaunee and Wendat people and is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. We pay our respects to the elders past, present, and emerging. As settlers, we are grateful for the opportunity to live, work, and play in this territory. My name is Sharon Ferguson, and I'm joined by Deepika Phoebe, and we will be your moderators for today's panel on female leaders and the changing landscape of engineering. So let me take this opportunity to introduce myself. I'm a Master's of Applied Science student at the University of Toronto in the Department of Mechanical and Industrial Engineering. I study engineering teams, how they work together, and how they communicate virtually. I'm here tonight excited to hear about everybody's journey.
Hi everyone, I'm Deepika Phoebe, one of your moderators with Sharon. I'm a process engineer at Spin Master and lead the development of the global PLM tool here. I have the opportunity to work with a strong engineering team with really strong female leaders, and I'm super excited to hear our panelists' stories today. We'd also like to extend a special thank you to Dr. Allison of U of T, the Ontario Society of Professional Engineers, and Spin Master for making this event possible today.
So we want to take you back 31 years ago to December 6, 1989, where 14 women studying engineering at l'École Polytechnique de Montreal were tragically murdered. This day is known to us now as the Montreal Massacre.
This shook the engineering community and continues to live both in our minds and our hearts. Let's take this time to reflect on that day and see how the engineering landscape has changed since. Specifically, how female leaders have emerged in the engineering landscape to redefine the profession and create a more diverse and inclusive engineering sector.
Today, we are joined by 3 strong, inspiring female engineers. I want to give our panelists an opportunity to introduce themselves and their current roles, but I'll quickly go over a few housekeeping items. So if you have not done so already, please ensure that you remain muted for the duration of the discussion. And if you do have a question, please reserve it to the end of the panel. So we can start off the introductions with Amanda, followed by Kaella, and then Medha.
Hi everyone, so I'm Amanda Bright. I'm the Director of Product Development at Spin Master. Spin Master is a global children's toy and entertainment company. We're headquartered in Toronto, Ontario, which is where I am right now. I have been in this role for about 2 years. Prior to joining here in Toronto, I was actually sitting in our Spin Master office in Los Angeles. I've been in the toy industry for almost 12 years now, almost 13 years. And before I was in aerospace and then orthopedic design before that. So I'm super excited to be here today and happy to share my experience with all of you.
Kaella, you want to go next?
Yeah, thank you. Bojo Kanawea, hello everyone. Ajanekwe Nwachagijik Indigenous. My name is Angel Woman Light Coming Over the Clouds. My English name is Kaella-Marie Earle. Wikwem Kong Minwa Airland Donjiba. I'm from Wukamakong and Airland First Nations. Makwan Dodam Anishinaabe Kwandao. I'm from the Bear Clan and I'm an Anishinaabe woman. So right now I work as an engineer in training and construction project manager in engineering construction system improvement at Enbridge Gas in Chatham, Kent, which is in southwestern Ontario. Here I lead projects in gas pipeline transmission and storage expansion, and I really love it. It's really an exciting job and a lot of work, and I've really learned a lot this year. I also work as vice chair to the Indigenous Advisory Committee at the Canada Energy Regulator, where we are developing new governing systems that will regulate federally regulated energy projects across Canada. I also work as an Indigenous advisor to the Nuclear Waste Management Organization. So a lot of my work is centered around Indigenous human rights and Indigenous law and energy and what place that has in engineering and technical operations. I also advocate for the implementation of Indigenous knowledge in engineering and engineering learning systems. So I'm really grateful to be here today. Special thank you to Andrea, for inviting me here, and really honored to be discussing such an important topic with a group of really bright lights in the energy industry, or in the engineering industry.
Hi everyone, my name is Medha. I am speaking from Calgary, Treaty 7 territory. I am a management engineering graduate from the University of Waterloo. I've had several co-op experiences in different industries like aerospace, automotive manufacturing, and most recently I worked for 3 years as a data scientist at Bell Canada. Currently, I am a Master's of Public Policy student at the Harvard Kennedy School of Government, and I am aiming to combine my experience of data science and seeing how we can use data ethically and fairly and create policy and regulation around that. I'm very grateful to be here, and I look forward to it.
Okay, well, thank you all for this lovely introductions. And let's get to know you a little bit better with our first question. So our first question is for Amanda. Amanda, how do you think the engineering profession has changed in the past 5 to 10 years?
Yeah, so I think as a discipline, we've started, I think really sort of for the first time, caring about what our makeup looks like in the field. And I think we've started to recognize the importance of a diverse team and a diverse body of human beings who ultimately contribute to divergent thought. So I honestly, I feel like it's new within the past 5 to 10 years, because when I sort of started my career coming through orthopedics and coming through aerospace, I found my experience there to be almost valued in homogeny. It was everyone went to the same schools, studied the same things, had the same value set, had the same hobbies, drove the same cars in some instances. So I'm finding more and more that organizations are attracting themselves to people who have different ideas, different backgrounds, and placing a lot of value in that. And I think a really important reason for that is because really divergent thought is what drives innovation forward. Like a lot of, group thinking and hive mind isn't going to come up with the next big thing. So it's super important to make sure that not all of our employees have the same value set or grew up the same way. So I think engineering as a whole has moved forward in that way over the past 5 to 10 years.
Okay, yeah, that's really interesting. I didn't think about how we started valuing diversity only recently, because I've been working for the past 3 years and it's always been like a big topic. So it never crossed my mind that it was new. So that's really interesting to hear from you. Kaella, how do you think the engineering profession has changed in the past 5 to 10 years?
Yeah, so I have a whole spiel about this. So I would say there's been a dynamic shift in energy and among governing bodies about Indigenous human rights and Indigenous law. We see Indigenous people excluded from the development of projects and bringing them to a total halt as a result of proponents, including us as engineers, not doing the work to build that relationship that is required to be built. So I also see people noticing the deteriorated socioeconomic status of Indigenous people, especially surrounding the deteriorated human rights of Indigenous women in particular. When we talk about diversity in terms of Indigenous people, the conversation is often centered around the one Indigenous person in the room. So what are they doing and what do they need? To me, that is, of course, exceptionally important. But one thing I'm not seeing enough of is the development of allies specific to Indigenous people. So diversity can't happen in the room, and the inclusion of Indigenous people can't happen in the room until someone is able to look around the room and realize that there are no Indigenous people there. Diversity can't happen until someone looks at a conversation through the lens of what would an Indigenous person think about this, and then from there build their thinking to realize that the conversation probably shouldn't happen without Indigenous representation and participation in that decision-making process. So what does that mean for engineering? For me, I think about what is most important to professional engineers. And the number one thing to professional engineers is always public safety. So connecting the dots. If Indigenous people are struggling with things like chronically underfunded infrastructural issues, causing safety issues to the community, For example, a water plant that is not only at an unacceptable vintage and running over capacity. Why aren't we doing more as engineering bodies looking at that and talking about it more? So what are we doing as a profession to ensure that we're acting as allies to Indigenous safety? Because they are part of the public. And you know, not only that, but Indigenous people, and this was a point that came up recently about innovation and the increase of innovation in the engineering space as a result of diversity. Well, for Indigenous people, the relational value of the land is part of the core of our cultural identity. And when you inject that into the engineering profession, we are able to come up with better solutions to mitigate climate change. So there's this huge untapped potential there for us as engineering professionals to really think about that and really weave that into our work. So my challenge to everyone here is to think about that and really consider it in your respective capacities as professionals when you're, you know, in your jobs. I would also say that, you know, UNDRIP, the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, is on the cusp of being legislated. So Canada already tried to legislate it. It didn't get legislated. They're going for a second try, like as of a couple days ago, through Bill C-15. Even if the bill doesn't pass though, major regulating bodies are moving to commit to implementing it, which means that UNDRIP will be touching all of our projects. That means that the relationships and the inclusion of Indigenous people is going to be critical to how our projects go as engineers. So this, you know, now is the time to be really proactive and really champion Indigenous inclusion in our projects, to not only better understand new and oncoming requirements as part of regulating and, you know, lawmaking bodies, but also because it's the right thing to do to implement truth and reconciliation. So, you know, I really hope that everybody in here is seriously considering that. I see it where I work every day. We're doing all kinds of things to, you know, become more culturally competent. And that's really, really critically important right now.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and it's so powerful that you said it's not just we need to have a diverse group, but we also really need allies, right? That's where we see big change. Moving on to Medha. Medha, how do you think the engineering profession has changed in the past 5 to 10 years?
Well, 10 years ago, I was still in high school. I didn't really know what the engineering profession was or what it meant. But I think what has changed, in my opinion, especially coming from a less traditional engineering background in machine learning and data science, is we see that in our education as engineers in Canada, there's a huge focus on public safety and ethics. And that's kind of woven into all of our courses. And it's a key competence, as Kaella said, in our work, but we don't see that as much, or we hadn't in the data science field, where people weren't really thinking about where the data came from. What was the data being used? Who are the populations represented? And that reflected poorly in results coming from various projects, whether that's, you know, autonomous vehicles, or whether it's, you know, when you Google family in Google Images, what color are the people that are shown? Like, all of these things were something that were never considered, because all the people that were working in the field tended to be white men, and that's whose experiences reflected. And I think there's kind of a cognitive dissonance there, where people always thought that, you know, engineering and math are objective, they're facts, they can't hold bias. There's no way, the math is not biased, code can't be biased, therefore my work is not biased. But I think more and more now in the past couple of years, we're seeing that's not the case. We're seeing a lot of proof of that, and we're seeing a lot of work that's especially led by Black women and women of color in investigating these, both technically, taking it to government, getting facial recognition that can often be detrimental towards Black people, getting cities to stop using those technologies. So we're seeing rising awareness, but we're still seeing that the majority of the work is done by women of color, and there isn't as much support in both the public and private sectors for people to do this kind of work. So I think there is work to be done there, but there's certainly much more awareness now compared to even 3 years ago when I started working full-time.
Thank you guys. That was a great discussion. And I love how we covered so many topics from like diversity leading to innovation, how we need to make sure to include Indigenous people and allies in engineering, and then how ethics and diversity are becoming an increasing discussion topic for machine learning models. So now we're going to move into our second question, and I'm going to ask Kaella to start us off with this one. So if you had to choose, what would be the 2 most pivotal moments of your career thus far?
I would say one of the first pivotal moments was, just to give you some context, I spent many years as an anti-pipeline Indigenous activist. And also for context, a lot of millennials that are Indigenous are the first generation in their family to not go to a residential or day school. So like much of our families are still, you know, first degree impacted by residential and day schools and what it did to our families. And so you got a lot of young, angry Indigenous people. And so I spent many years, you know, speaking out against injustice in energy regarding Indigenous people. And then one day, one of my professors said, "Hey, do you want a co-op?" And I was like, "Yes, I do," when I was at Laurentian. And so he enrolled me in the co-op program, and I threw my resume in the hat, and I got a job interview at what was formerly known as Union Gas, which is now owned by Enbridge. And I was like, oh, you know, like, I wonder if this is me drinking the Kool-Aid, you know, like, is this me drinking the Kool-Aid? It took me a long time to really think about whether or not I wanted to go through with the interview. And I ended up going anyway. It was for an engineering internship when I was still in university. And I remember sitting there with my first supervisor at Enbridge Gas, and he asked me, you know, what is your plan for the next 5 years? And I launched into this State of the Union address about how I was, you know, going to work hard to pivot the energy industry, you know, leveraging my cultural knowledge in order to help mitigate climate change and help move oil and gas towards the low carbon economy. And I was like, where did this even come from? You know, like I have no clue where that even came from. And I would say that was a huge pivoting moment for me, because from that moment on, that was what I focused on solely. All my energy went into that. And I think like the lesson there is you never really know where you're gonna go. But also that like when you have a couple of people championing what you want to do, and you have a couple of allies in your workplace that really believe in your skills to accomplish something, that can make a huge difference. You could just start totally believing in yourself and able to accomplish these humongous things that you never thought were even possible. And that's why, you know, I like to talk about the development of allies, because those people are the ones that really built up my career and made me believe in myself. So that was probably the most pivotal moment in my career.
Great. Yeah, I love the discussion around allies, and that it takes a lot of hard work from you to get where you want to be, but also you need support from people around you as well. So now we're going to move on to Medha. So if you had to choose, what would be the 2 most pivotal moments in your career thus far?
I think one of the first instances is kind of a combination of probably one of the hardest times and one of the best times at university, which was in first year. I didn't do particularly well. And it was really hard for me to get a co-op, which if you go to Waterloo or have gone or know anyone who has, it's mandatory. You can't graduate if you don't do it. And while I was having that trouble, I literally emailed probably hundreds of professors asking if they would take me on for anything, like unpaid, whatever, I'll do it. I just need the credit. And I ended up getting a position with a professor of computer science at Waterloo. And funnily enough, I had done really poorly in our most recent programming course, to the point where I thought I wasn't capable of doing it. And yet I needed to do this. So I took it on. And it was a very rewarding semester because I was able to learn programming kind of on my own terms and see it as part of a bigger picture. It's like a project and not just an assignment where, you know, you find prime numbers or something. It was something bigger than that. And I think that's kind of what kickstarted my interest in coding and kind of seeing where that can lead me. And really all it took, like Kaella said, is like someone to believe in you, to give you a chance when maybe others wouldn't have. And then for you to see kind of the big picture, because I think that these kind of opportunities for us to have co-op programs or experiential learning early on in our careers, especially as women, to see that we do fit in, and if given a chance, we can do the same as anyone else. And I think that that really helps build your confidence in what can be a really alienating profession. And for me, what it did was open doors for me to this whole new line of work that I probably never would have considered. And then the second pivotal moment from that comes from when I was working full time, and I realized that a lot of the work I was doing, or what I was seeing even on the news, like I talked about, the use of machine learning was really not satisfying for me. And when I realized that there was this whole field of study of people studying the effect of technology on society, and I realized that this is a path I could go down and really have an impact in the way that I want. I think those are the two things that really were pivotal moments in my career, and also in the way I think about what engineering is and what it can bring.
I love that. I think a lot of us can probably relate to your story of first year programming. I know many people didn't like it after taking the first year course, but then after they had a chance to work on an actual project, they got more into it. So thank you. Okay, now we're going to move on to Amanda. So Amanda, what would be the two most pivotal moments in your career thus far?
Yeah, so my first one, I would say I learned somewhat early in my career. And it was when I went from this idea of like, everyone's looking out for me. It was perhaps even before I had aligned my allies and my mentors in the organization. But I went from this thinking of, you know, okay, people are looking out for me. They're seeing how hard I'm working and what I'm doing. So like opportunities will be created for me. So I went from this mindset of, you know, I'm just going to sit and wait, to I'm going to ask, and not just ask, but I started telling. And I noticed the results when I started telling people exactly what I wanted and exactly how I could support the business, resulted in really what I was waiting for to begin with, right? So in a way, it was like, oh, this has been sitting with me the whole time. So like, who was I waiting on to do that? And for me, what that created was opportunities. Like when I worked at Mattel, which is the company I was at before Spin Master, I had identified that there was a gap in the business. We were building this new line, and our team in Hong Kong was sort of struggling to understand the design priorities on our lines. And I said, you know, hey, like I've identified this challenge. Again, I was early in career, and I think everyone was like, you have no idea what you're doing. But I was like, I know what I'm doing. And also I should go to Hong Kong. Like, I think I can help bridge the gap and help the team there sort of understand design priority, but also help the team who's sitting back in Los Angeles better understand the challenges that are happening on the manufacturing side. And again, it wasn't a project or an assignment that anybody ever would have brought to me. So it was one of those examples where I was like, you know what, like this is the right thing for me. So I'm actually just going to tell people that this is the right thing, and like we're going to do it. So it's a little of that like fake it till you make it idea, but it's always paid off, and it's advice that I give to my team too. Is when you put your hand up, and when you make it known what you care about and where you want to go, you're the first person people think of when those opportunities come up. They don't have to guess. And for me in my career too, that has been big opportunities like that put me here today. So I'm from the US. Again was on the team in Los Angeles, and the role here opened, and I actually with some of Deepika's guidance, really, like as a mentor to me, was like, you know what, there's this role, and you know, you've been talking about this, like, of course this is your role, like why don't you apply for it? And we were at dinner at the time, and it's just an interesting thing, because I think as we talk about mentors and allies, sometimes what we think about is actually that it's you know, it's has to be in a hierarchy. And I think oftentimes what you learn more from and what you can be mentored by is people who are on your team who actually see you in a different light than you see yourself. So that was a huge one for me. And again, like that sort of thinking about like, I'm actually just going to tell everyone what I want and what I need and what I think we should do, can actually drive you forward. I mean, I will also acknowledge that I say that with like quite a bit of privilege, like to come into some place and just to tell people what I want. I think, you know, I've had a lot of luck doing that, but I recognize that that's not something a lot of people can do. And there are a lot of compromised voices who can't do that. And to Kaella's point, like, you can do the same thing. You need allies though, and find those people who can amplify your voice and who can do that and say, you know what, like this person will do that, and we'll do the telling for you. And then the second one is somewhat recent. So in the wake of George Floyd's murder and the sort of cultural awakening that's been happening around Black Lives Matter, I was really, really dissatisfied with the responsiveness in my current organization. And it was easy for me to, losing it. It was easy for me to look at it from the outside and go like, that's not good enough for me. Like, you know, like you need to do better. You owe it to me to do better. So I had thought about leaving the organization because I was like, fundamentally, like I'm not, what I care about and what really matters is not fundamentally aligned with, you know, my founders or maybe the organization, the way the organization is messaging. And, you know, I had a recollection that like, I'm part of it. Like I'm part of this organization. So I can't stand on the outside and go like, you need to do better for me. I need to stand on the inside and go, we need to do better for us. And I think, you know, that's something that has also been something that's guided my career, is like speaking truth to power. Like it's super important to challenge your leaders who may not be as progressive as you, or who may not be as interested in having high stakes conversations as you, to be your voice and be in the room that you're not in. And fundamentally, I'm really, really grateful that I've had that. Like I have a leader who I can say like, hey, I'm going to hold you accountable. And like, I'm not in this meeting, but like, I need you to say this, because otherwise like I'm out. Like, and I recognize too, that in my place in that, like I hold the voice of my team as well. And it's super important that I represent their voices in tables they're not sitting at, and actually try to get them to sit at the table with me, right? So that was a huge one for me. It was like, it's easy to sort of look at something and go like, I want better from you, and like you owe it to me, and like, you know, step up and care about this as much as I do. And I think it's easy to feel defeated and like you can't do anything. But I had that shift of like, you know what, actually, like I can drive a lot of influence. I can represent people in this space, and I can make a difference. And maybe it's small at first, but fundamentally that's enough. That's like where you got to start. Like start small, and then influence as many people as you can. And I think that mind shift also sort of re-engaged me with the organization. I was like, all of a sudden, you know, and it was like a switch flip for me. I was like, I have a reason to stay. I'm super motivated to stay. Like I actually owe it to my team to try to move this organization in a way that's more fundamentally aligned with society and like what matters and what's morally correct. So those are my two.
Okay, thanks, Amanda.
Sure.
Well, yeah, well, all three of you, I love that we touched based on allies, because that's been so big for me in my career the last 2 years. I feel like, you know, you get a lot of interesting work to do, but if you don't have a good support system around you, it's hard to get through some of the tough times. And I'm really glad to have you and a lot of other people on the team that are my allies and can be my voice. So yeah, like Amanda talked about, challenge your leaders, and she does allow us to challenge her just as much as she challenges her leaders. And I think it's so interesting that, if you're on the inside, I think you can make more of a change from when you're on the outside, because you know how the inside works so much more. So yeah, I've always thought about that, but I never like voiced it out. So when you talked about it, I'm like, oh, that's how I've been thinking too. But thank you. So moving on to the next question, and this one is going to be for Medha to start off. So Medha, what is a challenge you think we are still facing in engineering, and why are you passionate about making change to resolve it? How has it motivated you to do what you do now?
I think a big challenge in engineering, especially here in Canada, is probably representation. So whether we talk about women or we talk about people of color or people of different caste even, there's a lot of, like Amanda talked about earlier, there's a lot of certain type of person that you see higher up in engineering or even at school. Who are your professors? Who are your TAs? Who are the people that are having a relatively easier time at school because they have family that have gone through this and know what university is like. And I think the reason I'm so passionate about it is I know what it's like when it works. I come from Calgary, where you probably know there are a lot of engineers here. Everyone I grew up around, my dad, my mom worked in engineering companies, a lot of our family friends. I've seen women in positions of power for as long as I can remember in engineering positions. It's never been a question of can they do it? It's just how it is to me here. And so when I applied to engineering in my community, it was a given. But at school, people were confused. They were like, oh, are you sure? Is this what you want? Do you think you can do it? And it was really strange because at home, I never got that question. And I think if girls, especially in school, high school, in communities of lower income are opened up to these opportunities and kind of have these awareness of who an engineer looks like and what they do. And to be honest, we do a bajillion different things. In this very Zoom, we have people with so much different experience that an engineer now in 2020, now engineers do not do one thing. You can do anything. We are problem solvers at the end of the day, that's it, right? So I think that's really the biggest motivation for me to do what I do, is that it's possible to care, it's possible to be empathetic and to be soft and be an engineer, and we still do good work. And I think that's really why even when Deepika asked me to be on this panel, I was like, oh, I don't think I'm a lead. I don't know if I'm the right person for this. But then in my head, I was like, well, if you want people to see people like you doing well, then you have to step up sometimes too. You can't get that kind of imposter syndrome kind of take over. So I think the biggest thing to me that we need to see is more natural representation of engineers, female engineers, engineers of color all over Canada doing great things, just like how this event is spotlighting so many great engineers. I think that's really going to help bring those voices to the table, like even Kaella and Amanda talked about, so that we're not necessarily forced to speak on behalf of marginalized communities, and instead they're in the room doing the work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's great. Like imposter syndrome, I feel like it's so huge, but it's because that's what we see on TV, that's what we see on like the newsletters we get from universities. It's like, come join us, and it's like, who's on the cover? So I'm so thankful that you didn't back out or anything because of that, but you did step up into it to show more representation. So Kaella, what do you think is one of the challenges that we are still facing in engineering? And why are you passionate about making change to resolve it? And how has it motivated you to do what you do now?
So a couple of challenges that I see. The first one is I would say that women are really impacted by professional bias in engineering. I from what I've seen, I find that men get more resources and more opportunities to grow than women, and have the respect of other men right away, despite having the same qualifications as an engineering professional and project leader. So a woman might have the exact same qualifications and experience and automatically not have the same respect of her team. Technical operations is really not gender diverse whatsoever. In the fields I work in, there are little to no women. And again, it takes more time and effort than should be required to gain a level of respect and trust from the team than what most men would automatically have. I also have dealt with people just not taking my technical ability seriously because I'm the only woman in the room. And I think it'll take male allies standing up for women and their professional integrity by listening to them and taking them seriously as a colleague, but also just standing up with them amongst their friends, you know, like, or amongst their colleagues. Just stand up for the women that you work with. I think that's really important. And that's how we're going to address that. I would also say that Indigenous people are horribly underrepresented in engineering. And there's a couple of reasons for this, including the dark history of the education system on Indigenous people in Canada. So obviously, until very recently, there were residential and day schools, which has fostered this narrative that Indigenous people do not trust the education system as a whole, which is completely true in most communities. So I'd also say that Indigenous folks learn engineering in a different way. So the traditional method of learning engineering or learning at all in traditional Indigenous systems is through mentorship. And so the whole like experiential process of learning and engineering is really important to include Indigenous people in engineering. And so because of this, you know, you don't see that many Indigenous engineers because the education system is just not designed for it. But this is changing. We see the change in programs like Indigenous Access to Engineering at Queen's, and we also see Indigenous influence in topics like engineering ethics, as well as Indigenous influence in energy at the University of Calgary, who actually has Indigenous engineering faculty. So there are similar things happening at other universities in Saskatchewan, Manitoba, and some moving in Ontario, which is a little piece of what I'm working on. But we should also be addressing the absence of Indigenous content in engineering, because if Indigenous people are not represented whatsoever in engineering or any of the content, like we were literally talk about everything else other than Indigenous issues, and it's not okay. Like it kind of goes back to the same thing I talked about earlier, how public safety is #1 for engineers. So why don't we talk about Indigenous safety? Like we never talk about it, we should talk about it. Also, treaties impact all of us. So Indigenous communities impact all of us. Everyone on this call right now is occupying Indigenous territory as part of a treaty agreement that we're legally bound to. And in the recognition of UNDRIP, part of that is recognizing Indigenous law as valid, which means that we have this legally binding system that is about to hit us. So engineers really need to learn about that and learn about how that's going to impact their work. So, you know, if we see those two things, you know, the change in how engineering is taught, as well as the representation of Indigenous content in engineering, I think it'll really help us address the underrepresentation of Indigenous people in engineering. I would also say that just overall bias training is a great idea. If you have the opportunity to do it where you're working, or you have a few spare minutes, watch some YouTube videos about it. Like it really, you know, it doesn't take much. It'll help you and make you a better engineer and a better technical leader. And it'll help you stand up for people who traditionally never existed inside the engineering space, like women, like Indigenous people, like Black people, and many other underrepresented folks. So we can challenge and beat down bias if we put our minds to it. I see it every day where I work, where amazing allies are popping out of the ground like daisies. So things are totally shifting, and we all have a part in it. So
yeah, that was great, Kaella. I loved how, you know, male allies are just as important. And I was just like scrolling through the participants, and I think we have like a good mix here too. It wasn't just like female engineers that like joined the call. We have like support from are male allies too, which is great. And I love that how you talked about education, because I personally believe like education is what can like really change the future. So I love that you touched base on that too. So we're going on to Amanda next. So Amanda, what do you think is a challenge that we're still facing in engineering, and why are you passionate about making change to resolve it, and how has it motivated what you do?
Yeah, so I think fundamentally I'll say I think engineering as a whole sort of as an institution tracks behind where society is tracking. We're almost like in this antiquated system by nature in general. So for me, it's like we're playing catch up. And I'm going to give an example that highlights this concern that's fairly recent. So in September, we were hosting an OSPE panel at Spin Master. And the topic was engineering, innovation, and creativity, the past, present, and future of engineering. So it's evident, right? OSPE has this value set. We're going to look forward. We're going to talk about where we're going as an organization and how things are changing. And Hamid, a colleague of mine who's actually here today, he spoke about the importance of empathy, which was great, right? So we're talking about all these things and how we need to move forward and be more understanding of each other and be accepting and be compassionate. And I'm fairly new engaging with OSPE, right? I moved here 2 years ago. So I was at this event, and after the event concluded, I was walking around and I was meeting the panelists and I was saying, hello, how are you? You know, thank you so much for your contributions. And two of the panelists looked at me without saying anything and said, oh, you're with Spin Master. Are you, one panelist said, are you on the design team? And I said, you know, this is an OSPE, you know, this is an OSPE event. Like 98% of the people in this room are engineers. So like, why do you think that? Is it because I'm, you know, I have interesting earrings on? Is it because I'm wearing this dress and I'm like fashionable? Like what is it? And then I actually met another individual who was on the panel. And I was introduced to this person by someone who I work with, who's also here today. I was introduced, and this person on the panel said, oh, are you in marketing? Like, Amanda, nice to meet you. Are you in the marketing team? And I was like, again, same event. I actually had my ring on, which is actually very uncommon for the US. I was wearing my ring. In the US, you pass the fundamentals of engineering exam after graduation. You take the oath of the engineer, the order of the engineer, you get your ring. So I actually wore it like out of camaraderie. And this individual, you know, again, looked me up and down, didn't ask about what I did. There was so many other approaches that could have been taken, but it was the snap judgment. You don't look the way I expect you to look. So therefore you must be not part of us. You're not part of us. And the interesting thing for me was like, actually, neither of you look like what you think we should look like. So it's so weird to see this reflection that you're putting on me that I would like, you know, by the same rules, like you would fall into the same category. And so from there, I was like, it's interesting because we have an idea in this community that we want to move forward. But I sort of suspect, like, do we even believe that about ourselves, right? Like, can we look at ourselves and go like, yes, like, I'm actually doing this. I'm actually judging people. I'm putting them into the same categories that I don't want to be put in. And, you know, as sort of a follow-up, you know, kind of funny thing is like, I shared this with a number of people in the room because I was like pretty, you know, shocked by it, especially as I was like gauging with OSPE for the first time, that, you know, and some of the responses were, oh, well, that's a compliment. They think you look great. And I was like, that's the problem though. Like, that's exactly the problem. So for me, like, of course I'm motivated to change that, because the more we hold on to this idea that honestly, that an engineer is white male and 52 is like, it disservices all of us. And like, just going back to my first point, right? Like, we can't drive innovation, which is fundamentally what we need to do as engineers. We need to move forward. We need to solve new problems. We need to drive new technology. And we can't do that if we're all the same. So this idea that it's like, you know, you all look like this is like, it's imposed even within ourselves. So I would challenge all of us, everyone here, to look at that and go like, what does an engineer look like? And like, why do I feel that way? And change it, like change your mind about it. And hopefully this panel is helping you change your mind about it.
Mhm. Yeah, that's great, Amanda. I love how, you know, we truly do need to look at our own reflection first as well, and only then can we make change. Because if we're trying to change something and then people look at us and they're like, oh, you're not even doing that, then it's hard to push that change, right? And I love like tying it back to even like Medha, we really need to be present everywhere so we can change people's mindset of this is not what an engineer looks like. An engineer could just be anybody. But so that was our last question. Thank you everyone for your contribution in today's discussion. We now want to give an opportunity to our audience to ask a few questions. So feel free to type it in the chat and Sharon will pick one of them.
Okay, so our first question from Todd is, what advice would you give to others hoping to make meaningful change?
Okay, does somebody want to take the question?
I would say just don't be scared to start doing it. Like learn about it yourself a little bit online. There's so many resources for everything, like bias, anti-racism, Indigenous cultural competency, reconciliation. There's so many things that you can learn easily on YouTube. So go out there, learn about it, and then take it back to work with you. You know, a lot of organizations have small groups of people looking to do things, and it's those, you know, 2 or 3 people that really care about something are the ones that change their entire teams. And if you just get involved in something small like that, you will change your workplace. It's pretty incredible. My second thing is that don't be scared to look up and, you know, try to influence up. I surprise my coworkers sometimes because I'm not afraid to send an email to the CEO or the VP, and they respond sometimes, you know? So it's like, you know, that's a really cool way to try to influence your organization. For Indigenous people, we don't really believe in like hierarchy like that. Our governing systems are more circular. So it's a cultural thing for me too, but it's a good way to direct influence and tell those senior leaders what you really care about and the things that they should be talking about, because really their job is to serve you and serve the organization. So that's my 2 cents.
Yeah, that's great. Take the leap. Amanda, Medha, do you have anything you would want to pass on to our audience?
I feel like I had talked about that question throughout, right? So if you want to make change, again, it's leverage the people you know, take part in it, be active, and also if you're coming from a place of privilege, looking at what you can do to amplify others, like where like what venues do you have, how can you represent voices, how can you put people at the table who have perspectives that are very, very different than yours, because that's what matters, that's what moves things forward.
Mm-hmm.
I think one thing I would add, I think while it's important to raise your voice and do your best at your workplace, that sometimes it can get exhausting and it can be damaging to your mental health when people are not receptive to what you're saying. And being a woman or a person of color, if you're bringing up things that are about your identity, to have people not take that seriously, it can be damaging. So one thing I would suggest is to always watch out for yourself. The worst thing that could happen is someone passionate about change loses that spark because no one would listen. So burnout is real, especially in a field when we're trying to make change. And it's important to take care of yourself. That's not to say take a step back or stop caring, is that it's good to have a holistic view of where you are. And sometimes maybe you need to be somewhere else where you can have a more receptive audience, and that's okay. It's not that you failed at what you were trying to do. It's just that place or those people were not ready. And at the end of the day, like you don't want to be like had that spark extinguished, then you really, your mental health is a priority too.
Yeah, that's so amazing, Medha. Because yeah, like it's great that we need to like bring up the issues, but we also need to look after ourselves and not let that spark die. I'm going to pass it back to Sharon for our next question.
So our next question is from Neha, and she asks, what's something that you can start doing today personally to implement change, which I think kind of ties back to what you guys were just talking about. But then our second part is, how will you hold yourself accountable?
I'm happy to take this one. So I am in a position now where I can implement change in who I hire, right? So if you are interviewing candidates, if you have open roles on your team, you can make a very conscious choice about who gets to come in the door. And so for me, it's like I can implement change on my team with every new person that comes in. And you know, a hiring practice that I use is this person going to offer something new that I don't have on the team right now? Will they elevate my team as a whole? Can they play off of each other? Do they bring a totally unique perspective? And that, I mean, honestly, that can be anything. It can be personal interest. It can be different socioeconomic backgrounds. That doesn't often come up in interviews, but sometimes it does. Like sometimes people are really passionate about that. So I think it's, you know, personally, like today, I mean, I try to do it now, but I go into interviews with this lens. And I think it's important for everybody to have this lens. Is this person going to bring something new and challenge me and make me think about things differently? Because that's fundamentally how everything moves forward and everything grows, and how we have anything that's break frame. And how am I going to hold myself accountable is like, I fundamentally have to, like, you know, you know, they say like I don't have great power, but with great power comes great responsibility. But fundamentally, like, I'm accountable for my team. Like I owe it to my team. It's like my function in the organization to represent them. And if I'm not, I have failed. And you know, I hope that when I share these things, that I hold my leaders accountable, that my team holds me accountable for the same thing. So I think it's a matter of sort of self-accountability. It's the expectations of the organization. It's the expectations of my team. Like nobody should let you get away with that if you're not taking it seriously and you're not moving things forward.
Yeah, that's great. Because I think we were doing like a bias training for the last 4 weeks, and that's like one of the main things. You might try to like hire the same people, but you really have to take a step back and look at if you want to hire differently. And it's great that you're looking at it from that lens. Kaella, Medha, did you want to add to that? How you're holding yourself accountable?
My only comment about that is COVID-19 has really presented a unique opportunity for everybody to sit at home alone and think about themselves. And, you know, 2020 is the year of introspection. So really like look at yourself and be like, am I being mature right now? Am I being an adult right now? Because that's what it's really all about, is reaching a level of maturity where you realize that you're accountable for doing the right thing and like moving, like helping progress like the rest of society in your role as an engineer. So I would say just really asking yourself what you're doing to add to that.
Yeah, I can definitely resonate with COVID-19 and asking myself those questions. Medha, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, for sure. I think for me, being in school, especially in a program that's so international, that I think what I'm going to take away from this is that it's my responsibility to look at what are the voices missing in our class discussions or in our office hours or our group discussions. Who are we talking about? Who are our policies that we're designing in class? Who are they affecting? Who are they affecting negatively? And who are we prioritizing? I think that's definitely something I'm going to take away from today. Especially being one of the few Canadians in my program. I think Kaella's point about bringing Indigenous ideas and voices and really thinking about the effects on Indigenous people is something that I think is not thought about as much in Canada and even less so in the States, that I think is something I can do. And I guess how I'll be accountable is just ask myself every day, like, what did I do to bring someone new into a conversation?
Yeah, that's great. I love that you're taking away some things from the panel today to take back to your program. And I personally can't wait to see what you do, Medha, because Medha is like a great data scientist person, and now she's going to school to make data laws. And I'm like, the world's going to be a much better place in 5 years. I'm going to pass it back to Sharon for our next question.
All right, so the next one is mostly directed towards Kayla. So Allison says that she's really glad to learn about the current news in Canada about the Indigenous Rights Declaration. And she's asking if there's any other stories in the news right now that you're interested from your personal or engineering perspective.
I would say one of the most interesting for me is what the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples is going to look like in the energy space. So I know the energy industry is shaking in their boots about free and prior informed consent and what that looks like. And I will go ahead and say this. I actually had a chance to have a conversation with Senator Marie Sinclair about 2 weeks ago, where we talked about what consent means. And consent's really, like, it's a very important concept, you know, in the worlds of everything right now, especially to women. And so we asked him, like, you know, is this going to provide a veto for projects to happen? Is this going to give Indigenous communities the power to veto projects? And he said no, because veto and consent aren't the same thing. And he said it in a really interesting way. So the concept he gave was consent is somebody asking me to have sex with them, but I say no. That is, you know, that's the consent piece. But the veto piece is me having any say over whether or not they have sex with somebody else, which doesn't make any sense. And so there's going to be a lot of upcoming conversation about what consent means in the energy space. And I think that's really important. So, you know, I would say add me on LinkedIn to listen to me rant about Indigenous rights and you know, the rights of Indigenous women in energy. And yeah.
Okay, yeah, well, I'm gonna definitely follow you, Kayla, because I think I don't have as much knowledge as I would like to. So I'm gonna follow you along and learn about it. I'm gonna pass it back to Sharon for our next question, unless one of our panelists wanted to add something to it. No, okay, back to you, Sharon.
Okay, so Vanessa says that the conversation about diversity in engineering space, that we've been having this conversation for years and making marginal progress. So for example, the 30 by 30 goal, which is to have 30% of newly licensed engineers be women by 2030, is only making moderate progress. So what do you think it would really take to push us over the edge as a profession and truly improve EDI in engineering?
Amanda, would you like to take this question?
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to take it. I think my you know, gut reaction is like not all that helpful, because my response is like, actually we have to blow it all up and we have to start over. So I mean, that's a little bit drastic, but I think fundamentally what it looks like is we need our leadership, the way our leadership looks, to change, right? So if we can't let go of that stereotype thing that I talked about, which is going to take some time, certainly. We need to, like, seeing is believing, right? So I think, you know, I'm fortunate enough to see that happens on my team, right? Like we, at Spin Master, our engineering team is split. It's 50% women, 50% men. And that is not normal, right? Like that is the women who graduate from university. It's about 1 in 5. Generally, depending on program, could be 1 in 3, could be 1 in 8. So, you know, sorry to everybody for also like sucking up all the super brilliant talent in Canada, all the female engineers. But fundamentally, it's that. I think it's easy to place women on my team because when they interview with us, they see it. They talk to me, they talk to Diana, who is my boss, right? We're both engineers, we're both mechanical engineers, both came from very technical disciplines before joining the toy industry and working here. So fundamentally, I believe you need to see it. So for us, it's like we have to place more leaders who everyone can look up to and go like, oh yeah, like that's what I did, and I look like that, and I came from that background, and like that person I trust to sort of be my conduit to the top, right? And I think until we do that, it can't change. And again, I'm in sort of what, interestingly, like it's never good enough, but I'm sort of in a situation where like this is what success looks like in a way. I have a diverse team. I have a lot of people of color on my team. And again, like we want to keep pushing forward, like nothing's good enough. But fundamentally, I think it's that. I think it's, you need to have leaders who are willing to, you know, accept everybody, look at diverse, you know, outcomes and opinions and thoughts, and be willing to put those people in their organization and not only that, but like help them succeed, like make sure they succeed. There's a huge responsibility with that. And it's critical to business, right? Like we should all be incentivized to do that.
Yeah. Yeah, I completely agree with that. Seeing like your leaders be female, it just seems more reachable, right? And that's why, like for me, like I never felt like it was an issue, but because I have like 2 strong female leaders leading our team. But then when you look around, it's like, oh, we're like the unique case, which is not great, but you know, we can set an example and I guess like sow the seed. We can't blow everything up, but we can sow the seed for things to change.
Yeah, I guess comment about that too, actually. Sorry, Amanda, did you have something?
No, I just wanted to add quickly too that like fundamentally, like if the organization doesn't serve you and you feel like you're not part of it, don't serve it, like leave, right? Like I left aerospace because I was like, actually this organization isn't for me, right? This is designed for someone else to be successful in, and it's not about me actually, it's about the functional system. So I think, you know, that's also part of it, right? Is like, don't hesitate to be like, no, like you're all like, you deal with your own dysfunction, peace, I'm out of here, I'm gonna go move something else forward.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I would say 2 other things. So one of the reasons, after I had my engineering internship at Enbridge Gas, the entire internship was amazing. Like I had a white male boss, and like most of my colleagues were males, but they really championed me, heard me, gave me resources to talk about cultural competency and talk about bias and do Indigenous Peoples Day for our whole operations team. And then my new managers made cultural competency training required for all of our engineering and technical team. And so I was really heard and valued in that space. And I think that if you are there and you can be an ally in that way and really champion, you know, that different face that's on your team, please do that, because that's how you keep them there. And then what was the other thing I wanted to say? I don't remember what the second thing was, but that's really, oh yes, okay, I remember now. So the other thing is, I am seeing organizations do something completely different about EDI targets, and that is from the top, which is the board of directors and the CEO level, saying, this is our target. We are making the entire company accountable to it by tying it to things like profit shares at the end of the year. If we don't hit the target, we don't get the profit share, you know, like really heavy things like that, you know, like this is part of our KPI now. So, you know, really holding people accountable and putting in a framework that makes them accountable for that is going to be the only way that it happens. You have to set the rules and then make them happen.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And I hadn't heard of companies doing that, but it's great to hear, Kaella, that it's like in their metric, basically. Medha, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think one more thing to think about is like how it all starts. So like, let's go back to high school. Let's go back to junior high. Why were there only 3 girls in my physics class? Why were no girls taking calculus? Why is it presented as something so challenging? Like, to be fair, if you have a good teacher, anyone can learn calculus. It's not a gendered thing. Yet in high school, it somehow seeps into everyone's understanding without even, it's not like there's an assembly where the principal says calculus is too hard for girls, yet every girl thinks that. Why is that? Right? I think it starts at that level, at that high school level of like giving girls the confidence that they can succeed in these hard sciences or math or whatever, helping them believe that they can make it to university. And then when we look at universities, when they're accepting very low rates of girls or women, maybe their admission strategies are not so great, right? Like maybe they're designed for a certain type of person to get in. And if it's not working, maybe that's what needs to change, because there must be lots of qualified girls that are applying. It's not like they don't exist. So what's happening there? I think that that's a good place to start as well. And I know there are a lot of organizations in Canada and in Toronto that work on, you know, going into high school, going into junior high, helping with, you know, robotics challenges or coding or science fair, whatever it is, things like that. I think that's another thing that we could probably think about as women engineers, is trying to be more present in those type of opportunities, showing up at school, showing girls what it's like, showing them what it's like to be successful and happy, and you know, leading men. I think that's also a great image for girls to have. So I think, and I think we're blessed in a way, Deepika and I, because our program in university was what, 50% women and men. Like we never, I think it never really occurred to us, but then we would look over at the mechanical class or the electrical class and you don't see that. So I think when we look at, okay, why aren't as many girls or women engineers, it's like, well, why they probably didn't get into school in the first place. And whether that, and it doesn't need to be university, right? It could be that they gained skills in other ways, or they went to college or had apprenticeships or were in the trades. It doesn't necessarily need to be university educated people that get into leadership positions. So I think that's another thing to consider as well, to make sure that we're really opening up the playing field and not just trying to level it.
Yeah, for sure. I was personally really surprised when we had the 30% engineering students, female engineering students by 2030, because to me, I've always just been surrounded by 50-50. And I couldn't believe the stats when I looked at it. But yeah, like Medha said, you know, it starts when you're in school. We don't want people dropping out because they think it's hard, just because anything's hard when you don't know what it is. But if you have knowledge, then you're like, oh, this is easy. But yeah, thank you so much. But yeah, unfortunately, that's all the time we have for today. I want to thank our amazing panelists and the audience who took the time to reflect with us and see how we can change engineering profession and explore how we can continue to push forward and make space and give voice not only to women, but also underrepresented groups. Again, I want to thank all the hard work of OSPE, Spin Master, and U of T teams for your efforts in organizing this event. And I hope everybody has a lovely evening.
Thank you all.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank
Stay safe.
you.
Bye.